Welcome to Paranormal M, your source for the creepiest stories and eerie phenomena. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss out on our latest tales. Brace yourself for some chilling content. Something is happening to me and I need to talk. I don't know if I should say this or what I'm thinking about. I'll just say that I'm using Google Translate. I'm not fluent. First of all, I'm not crazy. I've been to doctors and my life is good, without many traumas. I don't know if I'll go into too much detail, but I wanted to know if anybody's gone through something similar. About 2 years ago, I started having certain strange thoughts. I say strange because I can't tell if they were good or bad. That's not important. I had several meaningless dreams. Some beautiful, others not. But one in particular left a mark on me. A dream with a woman, 21 years old or so. Black hair, blue dress, and like a rainless storm. Didn't mark me because it was strange, but because it was beautiful. I found it beautiful in a way I even drew it. After some time, I simply forgot. And in a particularly happy moment in my life, I remembered her, and I imagined her again. Surrounded by the rain that shone in rainbow drops. It was like a representation of happiness and purity. So much so that during these images, I have a fertile imagination for some 21-year-olds, but they began to transmute into a figure of a young girl, probably between 14 or 15. She had blue eyes and silver hair, almost kind of like albino. But it was like a good vision. Was calming and inspiring. In the last year, everything changed. I went through a traumatic sequence that left me with some serious PTSD. And during one of my psychotic crises, this image came back, but it was of a different nature. And when I say different, I mean something that went beyond what one would expect from imagination or ideation. As the image grew stronger, I felt my legs shaking. Not fear, but a kind of electricity. My head started spinning and I felt like making unusual movements for that situation. Like bending down and sitting on the floor, as well as rocking my body in a rhythmic movement, almost like the movement of water. One day I couldn't stand this cycle of crisis. Couldn't stand this feeling anymore. I let myself be carried away by that feeling, and intensified exponentially until I lost it. I lost control over my body. And I say that in quotes because I still had control, I just didn't want to do what I normally did. I thought differently. I acted differently. Even my traumas didn't affect me anymore. I looked at them with like a contempt and pity. After a few moments wandering around my house, I simply went back to where it happened and came back. I recovered who I was before, and everything went back to normal. Except that the stress from the crisis disappeared. Thought it was just psychosis, till my parents reported seeing this figure. And all before, I even told them that I didn't even know. But the last straw was when an acquaintance from another city sent me a message that confirmed 100% my suspicions, and that it wasn't all in my head. I can't go into details now, but I can only say that I hadn't told him, my parents, or friends, or anyone. And the descriptions were they were so close to extremely accurate. Like a young girl with silver hair, blue eyes, a blue dress, and horns on top of her head. Oh yes, I didn't mention that after my crisis, she appeared with this. And this is very unusual, but I'm as skeptic as all hell. So much so that I'm a physics teacher, so I don't usually believe much without proof. Does anybody have any ideas, or do they need more details? Me and my sister recently found out that we saw the same things growing up in our home. Me, a 23-year-old female, and my sister, an 18-year-old female, were recently talking about things we saw in our house growing up. We both independently saw the same things. And I don't remember how the conversation began, but my sister mentioned that she used to see shadow people in the house growing up. I said I saw them in Mom and Dad's bathroom, especially when I'd go in their room at night. I'd go into my parents' room at night after nightmares and would watch 5+ figures walk from my mom's closet to my dad's closet, around the corner where the bathtub and toilet were out of sight. When my mom would tell me it was time to return to my own bed, I'd be petrified with fear. She'd have to walk me back to bed because I couldn't dare get out of my bed and walk past the bathroom to leave, at least alone. My sister asked me how many I saw in their bathroom. I told her there were definitely more than 5, but I could never get an exact amount. They moved past and through each other. I could keep count any time I watched them. She thinks there's as many as 11 in there. This was weird to me, but I thought maybe she was just playing along with me, so I asked her about the one in the laundry room. The laundry room door entered straight into a hallway. That led all through the house into the kitchen and living room. The kitchen and living room were sort of an open floor plan. So exiting the hallway, there's a kitchen on your left and couch and TV on your right. If you walked straight ahead from the hallway, you'd reach a glass sliding door to the backyard. So there is an uninterrupted walking path from the laundry room through the hall all the way to the glass door. There was a shadow figure I saw many times growing up. It'd start in the laundry room and sprint, clear as day, down the hallway through the kitchen and living room and disappear near the glass door. You could see each limb clearly swinging. It was like a human's arm and legs would, but it sprinted through the house. It was moving fast. When I asked my sister if she'd seen this shadow figure in the laundry room, she made a bit of a face and said, "It doesn't stay in the laundry room." I asked what she meant, and she described exactly what I used to see. A very clear and obvious person-shaped shadow running through the house and disappearing near the glass door. I never told anyone this. There's no way she could have described exactly what I used to see when I lived in the house unless she'd been seeing it too. But it absolutely blows my mind that we both saw shadow figures doing the same things in the same places. Have you ever had an encounter with the Hat Man? I wanted to share my experience and was curious if anybody else has gone through someone similar. Back when I was a young kid around 7, I used to live in a house where various odd things would happen. But one of the events that occurred that was by far the creepiest was when I encountered someone that I now, as an adult, have learned is known as the Hat Man. It was late at night. I was sleeping in my parents' bedroom because, like most children, I was afraid of the dark. I remember sleeping in one of those mini couches for kids that you pull out and turn into a mini bed of sorts, and lay on it. I was sleeping near the doorway, and I remember my parents had left the door open. The hallway light was left on too. I was drifting off to sleep when I suddenly got compelled to get up, opened my eyes, and sat straight. And in my doorway, I saw a man standing. He was wearing a suit and a hat, and he looked like he had come straight out of an old-timey black and white movie. I saw this because he was completely gray. Nothing about him seemed normal at all. But what was perhaps the most unnerving part of it all was that even though the hallway light was on, his face wasn't shown. After seeing this man, I screamed, woke up my parents, who also saw him. With terror in his eyes, my dad ran and shut the door. Afterwards, he grabbed a bat and searched for the man throughout the house, never found him. Later on, when we had moved out, we had heard that another little girl had a similar experience. And as an adult, I've heard stories of the same man being seen in hospitals right before someone's about to pass away. I also have seen similar renditions of the Hat Man in scary TV shows. I don't know the origins of this particular supernatural entity, nor do I know why my family and I had seen him. So I was curious to know if anybody's had a similar experience, or happen to know more about this particular subject. And also, have you guys ever seen a show on Netflix called The Hauntings of Hill House? There's a man in there who looks kind of like the Hat Man. Kind of scared me when I saw that. So unexpected. Ouija board story. My first Ouija board experience occurred in 2011. It was my senior year of high school and ended up moving partway through my senior year. Long story in why I've moved so much growing up, but moving that late in the school year, especially senior year, definitely sucked. But I luckily made some friends quickly that I was hanging out with almost every day. On the weekends, we would all meet up at my buddy's dad's house in the country. His dad had a hot tub and pretty much let us smoke cigarettes and weed and drink, and it was a big place, enough for all 8 of us. One night we talked about if we ever had any Ouija board experiences or even ghost experiences. Nobody had a Ouija board story, but a few ghost ones were told, and we all agreed that we should get one sometime. A few weeks go by and we all kind of forget about the Ouija board idea until one day we're leaving a football game. We go to a Target. We're in there looking around and end up in the board game section. As we're looking around, we come across a glow-in-the-dark Ouija board. Before I get too far, I'm a person with a very open mind. We've had many paranormal encounters prior to this, but the idea of a Ouija board didn't seem like a plausible thing to me. Especially with us buying this glow-in-the-dark one, it kind of has to be a joke, right? But after this experience, and another experience I had with the homemade board, I truly believe it has to do with your intent more than anything. So, back to my experience. We buy the board, head back to my buddy's house, and we chill for a bit till it gets around midnight. We're also waiting for, I think, 3 people to fall asleep, because I didn't want to have any party or anything to do with it. But eventually those people fall asleep, and we get the board out. We all sit around the table as Dad's getting the light turned off and a few candles lit. He goes to turn the lights on, and the lights don't come on. And right away we all start to get excited. Growing up, my mom had books of a lot of different topics, from UFOs to spells, and I remember reading in some of the books about spells that when you do a ceremony like this, you should say some type of opening statement to the spirits, stating your intentions and that this door you're opening is only temporary, and that you'll be closing it when you're done. So do that and start asking questions to the planchette. It almost did feel like it was moving in its own directions. Keep going a little longer, and eventually one of my homies on the couch starts complaining that we need to quit touching him. He wants everybody to stop messing with him while he's sleeping. We all just look at each other in shock, like, what the fuck is happening? So we keep asking more questions. A different friend sleeping says the same thing. Everybody starts to get a bit spooked. The table we're sitting was like a round table, and everybody scooted toward my direction, so it left the empty space. As we were asking a few more questions, that side of the table where nobody was sitting lifted up and then dropped. Honestly, we should have stopped there, but we continued. We moved to the floor and was the first one to move down to the board, along with my other friend. As soon as we both got down, we both felt the coldest breeze walk right past us. We were asking questions again and stated to have a couple things thrown at us from the hallway near us after that happened. Said my closing part to close the door. We never used that board again, though. But I do have another story from a different time involving a homemade board. A night worker at a hospital. Phone call from the other side. So this actually happened to a coworker of mine, but it's by far the creepiest thing I've ever been semi-involved with in my entire life, and I've been waiting for a perfect moment or time to share. This was a few years ago now, but I worked in a hospital. There's privacy laws, so I just wanted to give, some time to be safe. So I had this coworker, and we'll call him Jack for the sake of the story. I trained Jack. I worked with him quite a lot. One day I came to work, I actually think it might have been around the holidays, and he told me that he'd had a phone call that really creeped him out. We work in a call center, so transferring patients and employee calls. He said that a patient had called in the early hours of the morning, just wanting to speak with the nurse in charge. As is protocol, Jack took the patient's name, doctor's name, phone number. He then told the patient the nurse would call him back as soon as possible. The patient asks her to hurry, sounding in great distress according to Jack, and insisted that he was having cardiac arrest. We aren't allowed to give medical advice of any kind, but we are allowed to encourage patients in distress to call 911 or to go to the ER. So Jack did so. but the guy insisted on waiting for the nurse. Jack put the guy on hold, not wanting to make him wait, and called the nurse. While waiting for her to call back, the line dropped. When the nurse called back, Jack gave her the information and moved on with his night. The nurse shortly called back and asked Jack to repeat the phone number. He did, and he said that must be the wrong one. She was getting one of those "this number isn't assigned to anyone" messages. That's when she tried to call. She decided to look up the patient's file to confirm the number herself. The only problem is the patient died over 20 years ago. The phone number, by the way, was correct. Jack had checked it with the caller display while on the call, so it's definitely the number the patient called from. Despite the number being out of service and the patient being dead for over 20 years. To this day, we still don't know what happened, or how that was possible. Overnight at the Ottawa jail hostel. So like 2 years ago now, myself and a group of friends went to stay at the Ottawa jail hostel. Because we made a website to write about horror-related stuff, we thought it'd be fun to do a group outing and maybe get some live tweeting and articles going on about what happened. So, the Ottawa jail hostel, for anybody who doesn't know, is supposed to be a really haunted building in Ottawa, Canada. It was originally the Carleton County Gaol. That's where prisoners were kept and hung. But then after it got shut down, it got turned into a hostel. The Haunted Walk of Ottawa goes through here, and they also do their own tour that includes history both of the building itself and the paranormal. But anyway, nothing too big really happened at first. There was a bathroom at the end of the hall from the room that the 5 of us stayed in. 2 of my friends went there to check it out. There was a door at the back of the bathroom for the actual toilet, like to separate it from the shower. My one friend went in to check it out. When the other went in to follow her in, the door was partially open. But it was like something was pushing it from the other side so she couldn't get it open. The friend inside swore that she wasn't touching it. Suppose we can't prove this, but yeah. When we tried later, the door moved with ease. It was incredibly light. Later on the 4th floor, 2 of my friends, one of which, who was a skeptic, was making jokes much of the time, claimed that they could hear water just running. But they had looked around the entire floor before and after, and they were alone. No showers were running and it wasn't raining outside. Couldn't find anything else that could even be a source of running water. One of the friends even claimed that she could feel something following her, so much so that she and the other friend decided they wanted to go back to the room instead. All of this, as I'm sure many of you will say, can easily be explained away, and I agree. I believe in the paranormal, but I also believe in having a healthy dose of skepticism and checking out other answers first. What I can't explain, however, was what happened in the middle of the night. I probably should have given them names sooner, but we'll just call them E, A, C, and K. So, in the wee hours of the morning, I don't remember exactly, but it had to be around 3 or 4 a.m., A and C were still downstairs, but myself, E, and K were in our room in bed. The room had 3 bunk beds. I was on the top of one and K was sleeping under me. A and C were in another set. E was sleeping on top of the bunk across from myself and K, and the bunk beneath her was just empty. I was having trouble sleeping at first. I heard E come into the room and settle into bed. I could hear K snoring from the bottom bunk. K doesn't really do well if she's lacking on sleep, and I was worried. Once I heard her snoring, I felt better. So I finally drifted off to sleep. And suddenly, and I cannot express enough how this has never happened to me, I woke up by sitting straight up in the bed, literally like you'd see in the movies, like I shot up in the bed suddenly wide awake. I didn't feel like anything was watching me. I didn't feel like something bad was happening. I didn't feel scared. I just felt like I needed to be awake. It was like my brain and body were way ahead of me. I barely had the thought before I was sitting like A and C's bunks were still empty. K and E were still asleep. But across the room near E's bed was this figure. Still don't know how to explain it, but basically, when you first wake up and your eyes are fully asleep and your vision's blurry and a little shimmery, it was like that, but a defined shape right there by his bed. The rest of the room around it wasn't blurry, which is how I know it wasn't just my vision. And like I said, it was a clear shape. It wasn't quite defined, but it was like the approximate size of an adult human, just without the definition. I didn't really feel bothered, though. I didn't feel scared or anxious, or in the presence of something malevolent. I didn't feel like myself or he or any of us were in danger. But I also couldn't pull my eyes away from it. After a few minutes, I literally just lay back down and went to sleep. This is so unlike me. I have sleep paralysis frequently, and I'm afraid of shadows in my room, and I'm just generally a jumpy person. I'm not someone who sees figures and just goes back to sleep like it was nothing. In the morning, I almost forgot about it at first, and didn't tell the group until an hour or so later. The thing that gets me the most, though, is that I did research and I got home, and apparently a lot of people who stay in the hostel report seeing a figure standing at the end of their beds in the middle of the night. Wakes them up very suddenly. A lot of people seem to think that it's Patrick Whalen, but the last person to be hung at the jail was him, so I don't know. Feel free to debunk me, I don't really care, but I'm sure I saw something. Cold room ghost. In my house. My roommate thinks it's debatable, though. So I kind of can't believe that I haven't thought to put this story anywhere yet. But anyway, my best friend and I have been living in the same place for almost 2 years now. The basement is unfinished. It's basically just this massive empty room that we use for storage. There's one door in the basement, but other than the one leading to upstairs, which is the cold room. For anybody who doesn't know, I didn't originally, but a cold room is basically a small room used for vegetable and produce storage, things like that. I'm not sure if you can also put meat in there, but never heard of them before moving in. Anyway, my mom just briefly explained it. Anyway, we toured this place twice before we moved in. Originally, there were 3 of us. The first time the roommate I still lived with wasn't feeling well, so she couldn't come. But we toured with my dad, and then we scheduled a second tour so the third roommate could also see it. One roommate just brought her sister, who wouldn't be, inspecting the place with us first as well. We looked in the basement both times. We looked in the cold room both times. We made jokes about the cold room, but nothing weird really happened, so we went about our business. The day we were officially allowed to move in, one of my roommates, we'll call her R1, was working. She wasn't really with us. She'd already moved most of her stuff in earlier anyways. Myself and R2, the one I'm still living with, were moving the last of our stuff in. My mom was helping. My mom was the only parent who left who hadn't seen the house, so we were excitedly showing her everything. And then we were like, "Oh, we have to show you the cold room." I don't know why we were so fascinated with it, but we just were. We show her. We make some jokes, and then she goes back upstairs. R2 follows her. I'm about to leave when the cold room door opens. So I think, oh silly us, we didn't close it. We didn't close it tight enough. So I go and I close it again. I pause to make sure it doesn't open again. And when it doesn't, head back for the stairs, then door opens again. I'm a little unnerved now, but I'm still not 100% sure. At least 100% sure that I've closed it tightly enough. I go back, push it as hard as I can until I can feel the click. Then I head back to the stairs. The bloody door opens again, and at this point I shriek bloody murder for R2. She comes sprinting down the stairs, and I tell her what happened. She laughs at me and affectionately calls me names. She goes over, closes the door, and comes back to me shaking her head. The door opens again, we both look at it, a little bit freaked out, but she goes over, tightly closes the door, and shoves it twice for good measure. It's now tightly wedged shut. And satisfied, she comes back to me so we can go upstairs. But the door opens again. And at this point, Arthur takes a chair that had been left in the basement from previous tenants and used it to wedge the door shut. The chair's never been moved since, and the door has remained closed. R2 insists that it's just an old door. That the angle of the room or something like that is what keeps allowing it to swing open. But it was always closed on both doors we went on before. She says that maybe the previous tenants had kept it closed with something, but I distinctly remember nothing blocking the door, at least either time we toured. We opened and closed the door ourselves to look in the cold room when we toured, so nothing was holding it shut then. Make of this what you will. Friend of a friend. In 2013, I saw the spirit of a friend of a friend. I could barely believe it. First of all, because I barely knew this person when we were alive, so the fact that this person came to me puzzled me for many years to come. Anna was the daughter of a friend who at the time was just a family friend of my best friend. I was staying with my BFF in high school for about a month before I moved away to another town. Anna and her father used to visit them a lot. Anna was 9 the first time I met her, but we never really talked, just exchanged polite hellos. I was 16 at the time in 2005. So fast forward to 2013. One day my best friend called me in tears. They were saying that Anna, Jack's daughter, died in a car accident. That was the very same day, September 21st, 2013. I was sad for his and my friend's loss and decided to take the day off from work to help them out with all the funeral arrangements and stuff, and about a month or so after the funeral, I'm laying in my room listening to music. That's when I had this weird vision. I knew it wasn't a dream because I wasn't asleep and my eyes weren't closed, but in the vision I saw myself in an empty parking lot at night with street lamps. There's all these street lamps only around me, or at least the only ones that were on. Everything else was dark. Before I know it, Jack runs toward me, but not at me, just stops. He starts yelling at something or someone. I can see that he's upset and angry and crying. Can't hear his cries, but I can see him like in a silent movie or something. I see some other people that I know, but it's like they don't see me. My attention is mostly focused on Jack. Then out of the corner of my eye, I see Anna appear. She's wearing a long white lace dress with short sleeves, and she had butterfly pins in her hair. She's walking slowly towards him, and she's sad. She comes up to me and starts talking to me telepathically, like she tells me he's too angry and sad and that she doesn't want him to be. She says that he's angry at the guy who's in the car with Anna at the time of the accident, her mom's boyfriend. He blames, mostly anyway, he blames him for letting her drive to a driver's test. She asked me to spend time with him and befriend him. Then the vision ended. Couldn't believe what I just saw and couldn't understand if it was real or just a figment of my imagination. I didn't really intend to spend time with him as I didn't really know him that well, but when my friend and I did spend time with him, I tried to talk to him about anger and stuff, and after a while he mellowed down. For the longest time I couldn't believe why she would come to me of all people. Like 1 to 2 months after I saw her the first time, I saw her again. Weird, right? It was 9 or 10 a.m. and I was on my way to the food bank. I wasn't even thinking about her at all. I was thinking about all the times that things and just everything I had going on that day, go to the bank, buy groceries and all that. And I intuitively looked to my right at the passenger seat, and in a flash of a second I saw her sitting there in my car with the same white dress and butterfly pins in her hair. Only this time she was radiant and smiling at me. She told me thank you and disappeared as fast as she came. I was in such a shock, I had to pull over. Started crying then because the experience just felt so pure and good. It's hard to explain it, really. The whole time I kept thinking, why me? Then it hit me a month or so before her death, September 2013. In August, I was browsing Facebook out of boredom, and I saw the area where you see people you might know, like friends of friends. I saw her profile among them. Thought to myself to add her because I knew her dad, but this odd thought went through my head, like, why bother? This person won't be with us for too long. I thought how terrible it is to think something like that and dismissed the thought, but never added her. I think she came to me because I was the only person who knew her father, but not enough to know her. I wasn't emotional, so I was easier to approach. By that time, I was still struggling with the thought of spirits, so I didn't really know what to believe. From time to time, I'll think about this experience, and the more I do, the more I believe it really happened. What do you think? Is it too far-fetched to be true? I know that by sharing it with you, I might encounter people that just think I just come up with this stuff, and it's okay. I'm not here to convince you, just to share. Maybe somebody has a similar experience sometime. Maybe they'd like to share, but sharing with you won't make me believe it any less. I'll always cherish this memory in my heart because it's proof to me that there really is heaven, and a God and more. Wish you all the best. Transported from a public bathroom. This just happened to my husband, so it's pretty wild, but he wanted me to share it. We were shopping at an outlet mall and went inside Starbucks to charge my phone for a second. Sitting in a chair right beside the restrooms charging my phone. I'm directly beside it, so there's absolutely no way I could miss somebody walking in or out. They would have to walk directly in front of me on their way out, and they'd have to be in my field of vision clearly. So my husband went to use the restroom, saw him go in, and directly in front of me is a clear view of the entire rest of the restaurant. The counter in the main dining room, including a large table with about 5 people sitting on laptops doing work. So I'm looking forward when suddenly I see him seemingly plop right on the floor and his butt kind of by a large table. The way my eyes made sense of it initially, it almost seemed like he fell or something, because he was on the floor. But he came out of the bathroom. He never walked over, he just sort of appeared. I run up and ask if he's okay, and he looks extremely in distress and says, "That was crazy, let's go." It took him a while to collect himself, and he was almost unable to talk, but he said he had to say what happened. He said he went in and used the bathroom, and afterwards he washed his hands, leaned against the wall, and the next thing he knows, he's in the main sitting area on the floor. Shit was crazy. Still trying to make sense of it myself, has anybody else had a similar experience? Ask Reddit. The knock hung in the air for a second. I hesitated to move. The knock repeated once more. My heart suddenly was in my throat. I sat for another second or two as that rotten sound reverberated around the room. And this all happened in an instant. I slowly slid my hands backwards, getting them into a suitable position to shove myself upwards and out of that chair. My back was to the door, and as I eased myself off my seat, I began to pivot to face the door and the source of this hideous sound. Just then I thought I heard another knock. The sound quickly grew into a crash. I was promptly showered with splinters and bits of drywall as the door burst off its hinges and the walls surrounding it also gave way. But the incredible shock of this new development, as well as the sheer force of the crash itself, was knocked backwards into the ground. I opened my eyes as the dust cleared. I sat staring at this bulbous, bleeding shape staggering into my room. Some sort of demon, was it? The blood sloshed around his transparent head, spilling out of the top and badly staining what was left of my walls and carpet. Foul demon, why have you come here? Then I noticed his stagnant, hideous grin. It was the Kool-Aid Man, and he had broken through my wall. And it wasn't blood, it was just Kool-Aid. And his body was simply the familiar glass pitcher with a friendly smile. I remembered his commercials almost once. And just as quickly the fear subsided and was replaced instead with incredible excitement. "Oh yeah," he said in that familiar, gruff, yet laid-back voice of his. "I got just the thing for a kid on the go like you to hydrate himself." He chucked a box of Kool-Aid at my head from his white-gloved hand. "But I'm not a kid on the go," I tried to explain as the Kool-Aid smacked my cheek and fell harmlessly to the ground. "I'm 27 years old, and plus it's nuclear holocaust outside. Can't even leave my room." The living pitcher just stared at me, ever smiling, and his sugary lifeblood sloshed around inside of his head. Or was it really his torso? We continued to blankly stare at each other, my words hovering between us for what seemed like an eternity. "Vile creature." "Foul deliverer," of children's drinks. What did he want from me? Was this the form of an angel of death? Is he finally here to deliver me to the beast? His horrible, unblinking eyes stared, judging my soul, and I, the last man on Earth, suddenly felt a pang of regret for taking the last hit of acid on Earth. We sat there for 20 minutes, unmoving, not speaking. The Kool-Aid inside him eventually settled. That was as he stood statue-like in the remnants of my doorway. This demonic staring contest had no end. What am I reading? I eased my hand backwards toward my chair over the course of this time, slithering my arm closer and closer towards the only semblance of a weapon nearby, a wooden leg of my chair. There's nothing I could do after all. It was apparent that the Kool-Aid man had to die. My adrenaline kicked in, and in one swift motion with only one hand, I managed to completely tear off the leg of my chair. Screaming, I leapt to my feet, expecting some sort of reaction from my visitor, but he didn't move. Filled with a sudden divine power, I charged. Never having learned exactly how to defeat a post-apocalyptic hell-spawned commercial spokesman, I chose the tried-and-true method, the stake through the heart. I swooped in on him and delivered my righteous chair leg through the center of his face in lieu of the heart. The glass shattered much too easily, almost like an eggshell leaving a gaping hole in his face. Kool-Aid gushed from his body. Still he stood. I gasped, bathed in the liquid pouring from his evil figure. It was remarkably viscous Kool-Aid. Ugh. What is this? A moment passed. My hair and clothes were now dyed red from the shower of beverage. He didn't react, he just stood there as the Kool-Aid drained from his system. Still grinning, still mocking me. He had to die, now more than ever. It wasn't until the last drop that he had left his head that he finally dropped to his knees. Deliverer of happiness, ever smiling. I backed away from his huge torso, and immediately that hideous grin went slamming into the floor, his head completely shattered. I was left with nothing but a pair of arms and legs and a puddle of Kool-Aid so deep you could bathe in it. Panted for a moment, relieved. Then I chucked my impromptu weapon onto his battered corpse. When I went to the kitchen and fixed myself a delightful glass of pink lemonade and a Hot Pocket. They were good, but I forgot to put a plate under the Hot Pocket. Some of the filling dripped out into my microwave. So it looks like my producer fell for a prank. And I read it, as I always do, as a lesson of sorts. I know this is probably a common question, but has anybody else experienced disappearing objects frequently? So for context, I believe in paranormal phenomenons, and I've had quite a lot of experiences with said phenomenons, like items being tossed toward me when no one else, including me, is like touching it. Seemed like human-like silhouettes in like hallways and dark areas. Saw a silhouette standing in the doorway in broad daylight when I was visiting an abandoned house nearby an old house as a kid. Feeling random cold spots in the house. I do tend to be more logical and realistic when it comes to determining if it might possibly be a paranormal occurrence. If there's a logical explanation behind it, like an object moving around because of a fan or airflow, I usually assume it's me being paranoid or chalk it up to something that would be actually explainable. But I've been experiencing this phenomenon that's left me to believe that this is not normal, and that it's disappearing and reappearing objects. Now, normally whenever I lose something, it's usually because I leave it somewhere random and forget that I left it there. But there are times when I will put an object down knowing damn well that I left it in that specific spot without touching it, and it'll just suddenly disappear. Sometimes the objects will just reappear in the same spot or a different spot entirely. Other times it disappears completely without a trace. I just usually chalk up to me forgetting things, but This occurrence of me losing items that I know I haven't moved or disappeared suddenly has happened so often, at least once or twice a week or two for weeks, that I'm suspecting it might actually be paranormal related. The last house I moved from had a ton of paranormal activity. This is the same house where I witnessed an item from a basket being tossed towards me. No one else was around, and I was looking directly at the basket when it occurred. The item wasn't even dangling off the edge, it was sitting deep in the basket, so it wasn't even an accident kind of a situation. I've also experienced seeing silhouettes of a human-like figure in that house as well. And ever since moving, I haven't stopped experiencing these phenomenons. Not as often as in the previous house, mind you, but I do experience similar experiences here and there. I think the disappearance phenomenon is the one I tend to experience the most frequent. Could be a spirit attached from a previous house, as I haven't had this issue until we moved into that house, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I've had other paranormal experiences outside of my home, such as usually by or in buildings that have been there for years. I had an experience at this smaller business store. I went and the clerk pointed out that she thought there was somebody behind me waiting in line, but nobody was there. Felt a cold breeze before she said anything. That whole thing was creepy as hell. Encounter with entities. More than half of my life, I've struggled with addiction. During one of my episodes, I think I almost died. I saw some pretty out there shit. So going back to 2009, I was 15. I decided to try and take my life by eating a full bottle of phentermine. Never heard of that one. A full bottle of phentermine my mom had. About an hour after taking them, my heart started to beat crazily fast, to the point I for sure thought I was going to die. An immense sense of paranoia came over, and I shot out of bed to see a dark shadow figure in the corner of my room. I was paralyzed with fear, and I couldn't speak, but at some point I was able to run out of the room into the kitchen. And I knew at that point something isn't right. Start to hallucinate hands coming out of the doorway as I'm looking down the halls. They were literally waving at me. I would go up and inspect it, but when I get there, it just disappears. I could see a dark figure in my house crawling around, but again would disappear when approaching it. Felt like I was being messed with. The wildest shit I saw that night was what looked like a witch doctor at the end of the hall calling me. It looked like a boy with pale white hair and a loincloth. Had paint too. Went to go confront because, I wanted to die, but upon reaching it, the kid faded away like that scene in Hereditary where the main character sees her mom in the dark. It was so puzzling because I just wasn't sure if what I saw was real. I didn't sleep that night, and the next day I went to school like nothing, but still obviously tweaking. But I would hear people calling my name all day. When I confronted my peers, they would look at me like I was fucking crazy. Now I know what you're thinking. Drugs equals tripping, which is what I brushed off for many years. But other members of my family have had sleep paralysis in that house. My mom, my uncle, my cousin. Mind you, this was going on in 1994. From 94 to 2010, we had a lot of families stay with us. So I'm not sure who else have had experiences, but this wasn't my first encounter at this house. Not long before we were moving out, I could feel what was kids running around me. It was on the tile. Mind you, I was home alone. Me and my cousin even saw one of my grandma's porcelain dolls move. We are Americanized, but my grandma was still sort of traditional Hispanic. Always lit candles and do little rituals for wealth and success for her kids. Sometimes I think she was messing with something else, or maybe that house has history. If anybody else can find information on it, please let me know. My time at the street apartments. I've lived quietly with these experiences for 8 years. I'm 25 now, and I've had time to unpack what I believe I compartmentalized during a rough period of my life. I moved into this complex when I was 17, almost 18. I often disagreed with my godmother, who I stayed with at the time. So my best friend Sarah suggested I move in with her and her family in their 3-bedroom apartment. It was by no means spacious, but in my young mind it was leaps better than the homophobia I was living with currently. Sarah's unit was one of the bigger and nicer ones. I was already familiar with the complex as her mother was an assistant to the complex manager. We often spent the night in empty apartments neighboring hers. The empty units were already spooky to me as a teen, but even then I chalked it up to the eerie vibe of a room with no furnishings. There were a few things that were strange. One of the apartments had a doorbell that would ring at random times of day and night, despite the doorbell system for the complex being broken and eventually disabled. But that could be chalked up to just faulty wiring, so whatever. The other empty unit was more transient. People moved in and out frequently, so we spent less time in that unit, although I have many fond memories of sleepovers. When we did stay in that unit, though, we were never able to get the family dog, Tiffy, to come in. She would just stand in the doorway shaking. Although it was creepy, in my mind, she was just being a nervous dog. Labs can be weird like that. When I moved in, I didn't realize how odd it was at first, but not for at least 4 months. I was too caught up in the excitement of living with my best friend. I turned 18 and we spent most of our time out of the complex, either in college or with friends. The time I did spend at home, it was pretty lively, full of good food smells and incense. I loved it. The first time I noticed something strange, I didn't really think anything of it. Banging came from the wall of the next unit, and I just remembered complaining to Sarah, like, these guys are being awfully noisy. It was mid-afternoon, though, and seeing as there was new noises, I figured somebody had moved into the unit. The banging would continue through the weeks. When it got too loud, Sarah and I would bang back, and it would kind of quiet down. It would stay quiet long enough to no longer be in the forefront of our minds. I worked as a weekend and holiday receptionist, so I could continue my schooling without stress. So for Thanksgiving, Sarah and her family chose to visit extended family. I was working, so I just stayed home. I had no apprehension about this, kind of looking forward to it. I love alone time, as I'm kind of naturally an introverted person. I have no issue being home alone, especially not when I have a dog or a cat to keep me company. But that day I went to work, went home, did my schoolwork, ordered a pizza, and then went to bed. When I woke up, it was the cat yowling and hissing. I had left the lamp on in her room, but outside the window was dark, so I knew it was still early morning. I didn't check what time it was, and honestly, as a dumb teenager, it didn't even occur to me to grab a weapon or assume somebody had broken in. All I heard was the cat freaking out, and then I realized the dog too. Low growling and snarling. Wasn't scared at first, just confused. Then I rounded the hallway to face the living room. Suddenly the hair was raising on my arms. The cat was arched, yowling, staring at the dog. Tiffy had her ears back, fur raised, hunched as she growled at the corner of the living room. Yes, Gecko. The way our unit was set up, the walls of the living room faced 2 areas. The empty hallway connected all the apartments and 2 windows that faced the balcony. I was sure that there was nobody out there, because I had left all the lights on and could clearly see out into the porch. I told Tiffy to come, and she didn't even look at me. I asked her what's wrong, and she barked. I tried to touch her or calm her, but she just growled louder. Honestly, freaked the fuck out, home alone as a young teenage woman, I did the stupid, well, maybe smart decision to go back to bed and act like nothing happened. I left all the lights on that night, and the next morning felt comfortable enough to laugh about it with Sarah on the phone. She agreed that it was strange. We didn't have much else to say about it. The unit across from us had 2 tenants move in during the time I lived there. The first woman I didn't know. She would talk to Sarah's mother, though. So through them I learned that she'd been suffering horribly from sleep paralysis. It was an offhand comment. I never really thought about it. Then the next tenant moved in. She had close relations to Sarah and her younger sister. After a few months of living there, she quickly moved out, experiencing boyfriend troubles. Not before mentioning to Sarah that she had been experiencing sleep paralysis in the same back room with a recurring nightmare that she described as knowing something was behind the door, but being frozen and unable to look. This is normal for sleep paralysis. but the way it was the same room, the way the tenant had never known each other or talked, it was very strange. And at this point, I'd lived in this complex long enough to start feeling a real unease. I was grateful that we were only ever slept in the living room for all those sleepovers. But the nail in the coffin to this particular unit happened a month or so later. Sarah and I were looking to move out. We wanted our own space, and we were debating a unit across from us. It was $800 in 2016, utilities paid. Pretty unbeatable. Sarah, more spiritual than I was, brought over a family friend who claimed to be a sensitive, to test the place out. Sarah never once mentioned the last tenant's accounts to her. The woman made 2 disturbing comments in that unit. She called the living room a vortex of depression upon entering. And in the back bedroom where both tenants had stayed, she claimed she was unable to look at the entity behind the door. Typing this now gives me the chills. Like, how did she know? I'm the first person to call a hoax or scam to spooky accounts. Science and the human brain can do weird things, but this was downright chilling. We didn't move into that unit. Finally, one hot summer day, I was home with Sarah's younger sister watching TV. There was a knock at the front door to the complex, so I went out into the hall to greet a man in an official uniform and a badge. He introduced himself as a detective, asked if Sarah's mother was around, and I said no, and if I should take a message. He said he was investigating a reopened cold case from the 80s. That's where a woman had been strangled in the unit right next to ours, touching walls with our bedroom. Apparently, the killer had hopped the border to Canada, and now that he was back in the U.S., they were hoping to get him. I relayed the message later and then asked who lived in that unit now. The banging on the walls never stopped, and I could hear movement in that unit, and I swear to it, Sarah's mom insisted that there was no tenant. I had no way of knowing this at the time, but the articles that came out later revealed a woman had been taken hostage in her apartment. She'd been hogtied with clothing and then strangled. Her killer hopped the Canadian border and was caught killing a couple in the same MO. So, for over 10 months, I'd been sleeping just mere meters from the echoes of a horrific murder scene. I hated that complex. Moved out about 3 months later. Nothing much of note happening. When I think back on it, I wonder about the area. The cold case of the strangled woman. The complex was right next to a bridge, which was so notorious for people jumping off that they installed a security fence 2 years after I moved out. The only time I ever lived in that area again, it was a rental house directly across the bridge. I had horrible night terrors and moved out 9 months later. That was due to an abusive relationship. Never felt any urge to go back to that complex. When I spent too much time thinking about it, I get nauseous. Even halfway through typing this, I had to stop to calm my shaking hands. Never experienced anything paranormal ever again. I really don't want to. I don't want to believe in ghosts, but whenever I go to proudly boast that the memory of that complex literally haunts me, it makes me swallow my own words. Called 911 for intruder in my house. A few months ago, middle of the day, around 1 p.m., I was home alone upstairs. I was doing math for a college course. I lived with my boyfriend and my stepbrother. I heard the screen door open, and then the front door quietly opened downstairs and shut. The door alarm system just goes off saying, "Front door open," then "Front door closed." So I don't really think anything of it. And it's around the time that my brother would be getting home from work. I don't hear any movement downstairs for a few seconds, so I just yell, "Justin!" Nobody answered. I was thinking to myself, that's weird. I figured maybe he was just in the kitchen and didn't hear me. That was until I heard the door alarm say, "Garage door open." I stand up, go to the upstairs landing, and look down the stairs. There's a mirror on the ground. You can see the other half of the stairs leading down the other side of the wall through it. I see the garage door swung wide open. My cats are looking in the garage. The garage door is a swing door with a full-turn knob, not a push-down knob. The door doesn't stay open by itself. I run down the small set of stairs and catch the garage door by the knob just as it's about to shut and pull open the door, expecting to see my brother there. But nope, not there. Lights off. I just say, "Justin." No answer. Yep, that's enough for me. Shut the garage door and lock it, go outside. Nobody in the driveway. Quickly called stepbrother and boyfriend to make sure nobody came home and just left. But both were at work. I called 911. Told the operator I was home alone, but I think there might be somebody in my garage. Locked the door and came outside and explained to her what happened. The story above. She asked if there were dogs that could have opened the door. No dogs. I explained it's full-turn knob, not a push handle. She dispatched an officer. He arrives at my house, bang on the door to say that they're coming in, and asks if there's a firearm in the home. I say yes, but in the garage. Oops. So he calls for backup. They get there and then enter and search the house. Nothing. So embarrassing. They leave and I reluctantly go back in the house, knowing I heard both front and the garage door open. The alarm backing me up saying that they opened, and me seeing with my own eyes that the garage door was fully swung open and shut as I got to it. All the windows shut, and even if they would, couldn't have fully turned the knob to open the door in the first place. Backslider was also locked from the inside, so if there was somebody and they happened to get into the locked garage, they couldn't lock the slider from the outside. Texted my landlord to see if she could check on the door alarm for the door openings, but no alarms for the next day except for when my housemates left in the AM and when I came out of the house. I asked across the street neighbor for a ring camera footage to see if anybody entered the house, and of course no footage for the day except when I walked up to the door. Haven't had anything happen since. The cat won't stop sitting by the garage door now. Something just bizarre is happening. I don't know if we have a creep or something else, but whatever's happening is just weird. My girlfriend and I have been dealing with weird stuff going on in our apartment for a while now, but it's stuff that could have just been done by a creep, and since that's the more dangerous of the two possible explanations, we've been treating the problem as such. But I'm not sure that that's what we're dealing with anymore. It made sense that it would be a creep. We are two tiny, cute lesbians, technically living in a condo that we're renting. So there's plenty of old, lonely men who own their condos in our proximity. We also go through a super shitty management company, so it's plausible somebody had a key to our place. In fact, after a while, it looked to be the only explanation. And additionally, who or whatever was doing it seemed to be homophobic. The first week my girlfriend lived here, somebody put porn under her welcome mat. Porn and DVD cases, too. So there was a little attempt at hiding them. And it couldn't have been anybody that we know. Nobody knew where her new place was, and she doesn't have a lot of friends in town yet. Then every other week or so, we'd come in to find a picture of us and it'd be knocked off the bookshelf or on the floor. The shelf is high, but the glass in the frame was never broken. Then we changed the picture to one of her and her family. Hasn't been knocked off yet. Same type of frame too, so that's not the reason. When I was staying over, I'd feel watched and uneasy at times, and I still do actually. But I've just gotten used to telling myself to chill, since this feeling hasn't really resulted in any harm at all yet. Then after about 7 or 8 months, I moved in with her. After a few weeks, we noticed all of our pillowcases were gone. Just poof, nowhere to be found. We only have the ones in our pillows. Then shortly after, we noticed that there's an ashtray going missing. Super fucked up because it was a special one that she used daily. I tore this apartment apart. It's just gone. The only window could have gone missing is the 8-hour window when I was asleep. Checked all these vents for cameras. If this is a human, they know our schedule to a T. Nothing. So I started keeping an eye on our neighbors. I have a few suspects in mind, but no proof. Then a few months ago, the picture of her family previously mentioned was set up on its side. The most recent event happened a few weeks ago. We put a chain lock on the door, so when we sleep that way, somebody has a key, it wouldn't even matter. Well, my girlfriend started working nights, so I had to lock the chain in our bedroom instead while I slept. When she came home, it was unlocked. I don't sleepwalk, so that prompted us to change the locks again. Should have done it sooner, but for a while we were more keen on catching them than just stopping them. And if it was a person, well, we could defend ourselves, but they never hurt us, so it wasn't a big worry. But this is the bizarre part. A little before we changed the lock, I noticed a small, dark stain appearing on our carpet. They're only in the back of the apartment, where our bedroom and the bathroom are. They don't lead to or from any door. They're too far apart to be traced to shoes or socks, but I still checked the bottom of every shoe and sock in its place. Some kind of looked like ink stains. Some looked like spots or soot from a chimney, which we don't have. I've gone through every logical explanation that I can think of, looked into anything that could have dropped or something. There's nowhere we're doing this. We've showed up after we changed the lock, so now we're creeped out to the point where it's interfered with our lives. Either we have the slickest creeper on Earth, or we're dealing with something else. And ice is disappearing out of our freezer. It's not melting, it's not getting clumped together, and it's even going missing when I'm the only one home and no guests have been by or anything. My girlfriend's noticed it too. I always thought it must have been her, even though I didn't see her use ice. I thought I just missed it. She thought the same. When I noticed it was alone, when I was alone, rather, I freaked out a little. Miscellaneous things had gone missing here and there too, but nothing super notable. It's things like a coaster or something. It's just bizarre. Anybody else ever had this happen? Any idea why the fuck these dark spots on the carpet might be? Could be mold. Saw something in a reflection, but not in real life. So I was laying in bed, my cat was sitting on my chest, and above my head on the wall were two rectangle art pieces. I was petting my kitty, and we were exchanging slow blinks, because I love her. Then she starts looking at something on the wall above my head. I tilted my head back to look and didn't see anything of note, and I looked back at my kitty. She's still looking intently at something on the wall. I'm sure I said something like, "What are you looking at, pretty girl?" I glanced again and again, nothing of notes on the wall, so I shrugged it off as a cat doing silly nonsense cat things. I kept petting her. Then I look in her eyes, and in the reflection of her eye, I can see the two paintings. They're distinct as the only two things on that wall, but I can see something in between them. I glance up again and nothing's there, look back in the kitty's eyes, and there's something there in between the two paintings. So now I'm really focused on the reflection in her eyes. And I'm sure it goes without saying that reflections of this nature aren't very detailed, so I'm really struggling to figure out what the heck I'm looking at in between those paintings. Then whatever it is ran off. I saw it move in her eye, and then she moved her head toward the direction it ran a split second later. I hopped out of bed and took a good look at the area, and there's nothing there. Because of how ambiguous reflections are, I can't really say to describe it was relatively cat size. And I say ran off because that's the best I can do to describe how it moved. A friend had a theory about the strange object being something to do with the anatomy of cats' eyes. And I'll tell you what I told them, which is I'm not ruling it out as a possibility, but I'm a problem solver by nature, and with my face a foot away from hers while trying to figure this out, I think I would have deduced that if it were the root of the cause. And I'm sure you've deduced that this is the end of tonight's stories. See ya.